The most common struggle that I see among survivors of narcissistic abuse, particularly where the abuse took place in an intimate relationship, is during what they call the hoovering phase. And that's when, the abuser is, you've already left the person and the abuser is texting you or calling or emailing or, showing up somewhere, somehow trying to get your attention and pull you back. And I want to talk about how to get through that phase because this is really key to the breakthrough experience where you finally get out of the denial and kick the addiction. So, whether you're in the ending throes of a relationship or whether you've just recently left, maybe you've already pierced the denial a bit, right? Like you're mostly aware of what this person is doing. You can mostly recognize that you are in an abusive relationship. You likely know that your partner is a narcissist or possibly a psychopath or sociopath. And you're just still trying to get to like that final understanding. You're not there yet, and it's like there's like this deep sense of inner conflict, right now, and you can't break through that. Like you have moments where you're broken through, and then moments where you're back in it. And I know it really, really hurts to be stuck in this whole like wanting to maintain the no contact and then wanting to respond when the person does contact you, or even like wanting to send a proactive message to that person on your own because maybe you've had like some kind of realization of, something that you learned from what happened, or maybe you're hoping that this person will apologize, or maybe you're hoping that they'll take some accountability for their actions, or you're just looking for some kind of answer to explain like what the heck happened. And suddenly maybe like you're even doing it. Like you're telling yourself like, I'm not going to contact him or her. I'm not going to do it. I'm just not going to do it. I'm not going to do it. And then like before you know it, like you're sending the text message or like you're writing the email or like, and you're like, oh my God, I can't believe I just did that. Right. And like it happened. Like you couldn't control yourself and you didn't realize until it was too late. So what happened there? Well, that was denial. Like denial kicked in there, and denial is like a form of amnesia. In fact, it's probably the most, I would say, primitive human defense mechanism. We have numerous psychological defense mechanisms that we rely on when we get into some sort of really difficult, traumatic situation, which abuse is. And denial is like the single biggest pitfall to the self-healing process. And for example, denial is incredibly common in families where abuse took place. When the survivor finally, gets up the courage to speak the truth, like very common in sexual abuse. There was a member in the family who abused another member, and the survivor speaks out, and people don't want to believe, because it's so close to home, and it's like it's the cognitive dissonance between what they want to believe and the truth that's being presented to them is just so conflicting that they can't get the message into their conscious mind. And we think that denial is like a choice, like it's a conscious choice to be in denial, but I really don't think so. I think it's actually much more of a subconscious thing where it's like this information is just automatically suppressed, and you almost don't even have control of this happening. And if you think about it, like, why does this phenomenon exist, right? Why do we have denial? And, it probably makes sense that like when you're in the moment and you're in the middle of some kind of abusive or life or death situation, and we can go back to like the earlier humans, right? Like say it's a saber-toothed tiger, right? That's coming at you. And so like whatever emotionally is going on in your life, like maybe you're having an argument with someone, with your partner, or something difficult is happening, like all of that just gets immediately stuck into denial, and you're just in the moment, like you're acting in the moment, you're reacting in the moment, you're in a life or death survival situation, right? So denial is actually a beneficial psychological defense mechanism in some situations. The problem is that in abusive situations, it can be working to your detriment. And like I said, it is the single biggest pitfall to the self-healing process. So that's what's happening in that hoovering phase when, the person is contacting you and you're getting sucked back in. Either you respond to them, and or you might even like reach out to them instead of waiting for them to contact you. And what's going to happen is sort of like this inevitable anxiety and fear from that contact with them. And that anxiety and fear will actually end up strengthening the trauma bond between you and this person. So what actually happens in this kind of relationship is like a chemical addiction. Your brain developed a chemical addiction to the abuser and to the relationship because of the feeling that you got on like a biochemical level. And when you have sex with someone, you are at like a whole other level of energetic and biochemical connection. Like it reinforces the bonding, which is then followed up by the anxiety that something's not right and something's not okay and what's going on. And then the fear of, oh my God, something bad is happening. And then the pain of what bad is happening, and then some sort of momentary relief from that pain, and then sex again, and then bonding again, and then you get into this like trap, this cycle where it seems like there's no way out. And the more ongoing the nature of this relationship, the more difficult it is to reach the escape velocity, and the thing is that the addiction is the trauma bond. And it is an addiction. And when you leave this person or this relationship, like you actually go through a withdrawal. And it's very tempting to go back. It's very tempting to go seek that substance from either that person or from another person, like a new person that you meet or some other person that you know. And all of this is happening unconsciously while it's still in the denial, until you can stretch your awareness around it, until you can realize what's happening, it's entirely subjugated. So, I understand this like irresistible pull backward that makes you feel helpless and trapped. And technically it's called Stockholm syndrome. It's a form of trauma bonding where it becomes like this desperate survival mechanism in psychologically traumatic situations. And the term originally came from like a hostage situation in a robbery, but it is very common in abuse. It is very common in relationships. And the Stockholm syndrome is characterized by the presence of a perceived threat, whether that be psychological or physical, and the belief that, the abuser would carry out this threat. And this threat, of course, is like, it's your absolute sort of like life or death survival. Like you feel like this person has complete control of your life or death at some point. And then the other thing that's important here is like a perceived small kindness from the abuser to the victim. If you're in a relationship, the way this might work is, one day you're being abused by your partner, and then the next day, like, he or she cooks you dinner and is really sweet, or brings home your favorite food or ice cream or wine. And then, it becomes psychologically confusing. And the third criteria for the Stockholm syndrome is like an isolation from other people's perspectives. Because if the abuser can isolate you from anyone else perceiving that something isn't right, that something bad is happening, as long as you're isolated from that, then no one is ever going to realize it. You're never going to tell anybody else. You're always going to be silent about it. And no one will have a clue that you're actually being abused. And the fourth characteristic is the perceived inability to escape the situation. So the Stockholm syndrome really explains like why people go back for more, why they stay in abusive relationships, and why they placate, enable, rationalize, defend, and make excuses for their abuser, and maybe even attack somebody who calls out the abuse that's happening, so like, I think you're being abused, and then the victim is like defending the abuser. And it doesn't make sense to someone who hasn't been through it. But the reality is that this is sort of like just the way that the human consciousness operates under trauma. And, for example, I talked to a woman in her mid-30s the other day, and when she was 17 years old, she was raped by some guy, and he ended up calling his two friends, and then they both raped her. And in between the time that he had raped her and his two friends showed up, he told her to go to the bathroom to wash herself off. And when she was in there, you know, she observed herself from some sort of out of body observation, witness perspective. And she realized there was only one door, you know, to this room, and that there was no way out. Like, she knew what was going to happen if she stayed there, but she also knew that there was no way out. And it happened. And then afterward, you know, he drove her back to the train station. And then he got her to bring some of her friends. And then the same thing happened to her friends. And I said, okay, so, you know, then what happened after that night? And she said, well, you know, I fell in love with him. And I said, wow, right? And so how do you think that happened? And she said, well, you know, it's like he raped me, right? And this really awful thing happened, but then he drove me to the train station. And those kind of things get really confusing. And I said, and what happened to your friends? Well, they fell in love with those guys too, because, you know, it's just so confusing when they offer you a ride to the train station. And so that is like a classical example of Stockholm syndrome. And it doesn't have to be that stark. You know, it could be as simple as the day by day ongoing degradation of a person's sense of reality through gaslighting, verbal abuse, and all sorts of psychological tactics that the person could use. And then, you know, stonewalling. As soon as you call them out on something, either they shut down entirely and they have nothing to say, or they absolutely deny it. And then it gets to the point where they're accusing you of doing something that you didn't do and had nothing to do with what you were talking about, but somehow the conversation got around to that. And that creates a very similar fragmentation in the mind, which is essentially what it is. It's a fragmentation. And that's trauma bonding. So, you know, these kind of conflicting feelings, this trauma bonding, this is actually the addiction here. And that's the hardest part about getting over the hoovering process, because it is literally like a chemical addiction and withdrawal. And people ask often, you know, like, when is it going to end? Like, when am I going to stop wanting to go back to him? When am I going to finally realize, like, I know it, I really know it, but then I just keep going back, like I can't help myself. And for me, like, those conflicting feelings ended when the full on reality set in. And here it is. All right, are you ready? And this truth probably hurts more than like anything else about this situation, but it is real. Okay, it is not love that makes you want to go back to that person. It's not love. You think it's love. You think it's because you love them. It's not love. Your nervous system has learned to interpret that behavior, that relationship, that interaction as love. Okay, that is actually an addiction to trauma bonding. And the anxiety and the fear that you feel every time you receive a communication from that person or have flashbacks of things that happened, and you're rehashing it over and over in your mind, that actually strengthens that trauma bond, right? Again, counterintuitive, right? Like, you would think the anxiety and the fear would snap you out of like that connection, but that's just not the way that the human mind responds to trauma. And the human psyche does this unconsciously. You know, like I was saying, denial is not a conscious choice. Like, it appears to be some kind of survival mechanism, and it is incredibly confusing. And when like an overwhelming surge of mental energy happens, like during these emotionally intense moments, either through live experiences or reliving them afterward through memories, because like, you know, your mind can't actually tell the difference between what's actually happening right now and what you're imagining or thinking is happening. So the emotional charge of this like clashing, conflicting energy essentially overloads the circuits of the brain, and then the whole nervous system short circuits, and it's like tripping the breaker, right? And so when it gets tripped like that, like, we lose the awareness of what's happening. it is the precursor to the fall into the denial. And it becomes very normal to go on this roller coaster ride between moments of lucidity and clarity, and then the slip back into denial before you even realize it's happening. And it's typically what happens when a victim is starting to realize that they need to leave the relationship, or when a survivor has left and is trying to make sense of it all and stay away from this person and from like this irresistible pull to go back. And there's another thing, another form of denial that I call, I mean, it is denial, but I call this the Groundhog Day effect. And, you know, you've probably seen the movie with Bill Murray where like every day he wakes up and it's Groundhog Day again, and he has to like live this day again. And he just like, he keeps doing the same thing over and over again until he like gets exasperated. And then finally he realizes like he has the opportunity and the choice to choose a different path, you know. And so instead of choosing the denial, like he finally catches on and he has the ability to shape his reality and make different choices. So like, for example, sometimes I would have like these massive realizations about something, about the relationship, about why I was drawn to that, about something really important. And then like the next day or the next hour or the next minute, I totally forgot. And it could have been like months and months later that I finally had this realization again, right? Only to realize that I had forgotten to remember that, like, I realized that a long time ago. Like, I had just completely forgotten that I already had that revelation. Like, I knew that. But somehow that revelation, like, it slipped right underneath the veil of denial. And that roller coaster ride can go on for some time. And, you know, I even hear people consciously aware of that roller coaster ride and still unable to get out of it. And, you know, they'll say something like, so, you know, now I know what I'm about to say is probably trauma bonding, but, you know, she's really helping out a lot more at home and with this and that, or, you know, he's really trying a lot harder. And it's like, they know, like consciously they know, but subconsciously they're still in that denial. And when I tell them sometimes that I see them going back and forth between these moments of clarity and lucidity and then the denial, they usually laugh because like they know it's true. They totally know that it's true, and they still can't quite get out of that. And one person even told me the other day, he's like, so in other words, basically I see and smell my own protective bull, right? I'm like, yeah, totally. And the thing is that, you know, denial, like not only is it in the subconscious, but it runs like layers and layers deep into the subconscious. And it's like you're fighting the survival wiring of your nervous system that is programmed not to let that information come through. And until like you suddenly have this like moment, and it could be something usually spontaneous, serendipitous, synchronistic that just happens where it's so emotionally cathartic that it breaks through. I call it like the OMG moment, where you're suddenly just like, oh my God. Right? And like you can't even move for like minutes maybe, because like it's finally hit you, and it's just like, it is so powerful and so humbling and so real that you finally get it. And like that emotional charge, that pull, like that almost like just desperate, irresistible pull is suddenly gone. It's like it's not there anymore. And for me, that moment came, I mean, and it was a long process, and it was like layer after layer after layer was unwinding, but it was just like so deep. For me, that moment, that breakthrough moment came out in rooting out the core wounds around love and abuse in childhood, and to face that stark truth that isn't love. That you kept choosing what was familiar according to your childhood template of love and relationships, which you learned. You know, you learned by observing it, and then you learned to accept that that was normal, but that's actually very dysfunctional. You know, and that is the moment where you have the breakthrough, you know, and you break and leave behind the chains of the denial. And that's when you're finally home free. And it's at that point that you can actually take 100% of your life now. Like you're ready and willing to take 100% of your life now and focus your energy on the healing journey instead of leaking so much energy thinking about them about the relationship, about the flashbacks and the regrets of things you wish differently, and wondering like, you know, how did they even treat you like that way, and will they ever even realize that they hurt you, and is closure even possible, you know? And once you take 100% responsibility for yourself now and reclaim your energy by not sending it to that person through your thoughts and words and actions, then, you know, that's the point when you can retrain your mind, your body, and your nervous system to function in healthier ways. So it's like, it's almost like that absolute cathartic breakdown has to happen, you know. And you normally, there's many breakdowns along the way, but then I'm talking about like the massive one that pierces the finality of your denial around that, where like you finally accepted reality, right? Because beforehand it was the denial, and the denial is when like you just couldn't accept the reality. So you had the breakdown, and then you accepted it finally, and then you have the breakthrough. And self-awareness, you know, is the gift that comes through those breakthrough experiences. And the more that you develop that self-awareness, and the more you keep working on that self-awareness, the more you know, like, you're not going to go back for more, not from that person, and you're not going to fall for it again in another person. It's like you really get it. So, you know, the key, I think, because of those Groundhog Day effects, I think the key is to write down, like to document everything. Like maybe you can't write, you know, when you're having like, you know, these breakthroughs, like your mind is moving like 1,000 miles a minute, and you can't write as fast as your mind is going. So maybe you want to use like an audio recording and like just record that. Maybe you just want to like shoot a quick video, like a selfie video, so you can just listen to it later. Maybe you want to call someone that you really love and trust and tell them about it, so that, you know, they can hold you accountable to your truth. And like, you know, then they can remind you, hey, you know, remember when you had this realization about you, or about your relationship, or about your partner? Remember when you had that realization? Oh, yeah, I did, didn't I? Right? And so like they're helping to hold you accountable for the truth that you've discovered. And, you know, another way is through exhaustion. Like sometimes, like just to get to that breakthrough point, like sometimes, you know, when you reach like utter and total physical exhaustion, like maybe it's through some kind of physical exercise where like you went and hiked a mountain, or maybe like you've just been like fighting and fighting and fighting with your partner all day, and somehow like you hit this point of exhaustion where your defense mechanisms melted, right? And denial is a defense mechanism, and suddenly you can pierce through those defenses with your awareness, right? And then you suddenly see it. And it doesn't matter how you get to that point. And it's almost like you can't really force it. And I'm not trying to tell you how to force it, because it comes when it does. And it comes essentially when you're ready to see it. And until you're ready to see it, you can't see it. Like no matter how many people see it and tell you about it, no matter how clear it is, how blatant it is. I mean, that person might like flat out tell you that they don't care about you. You know, like it could be so obvious, but until you're ready to see it, you won't pierce through that denial. And so that's where I see everyone, you know, for the most part, most people are getting stuck in that hoovering stage. That was the biggest hurdle for me, was the denial that was just like holding me there and wanting to go back for more and wanting to go back. And, you know, and then every time you go back, you get set back that much further, because that anxiety, that fear, what was happening in the interaction with that person triggered all the past memories of what happened with that person, and then likely triggered all the past experiences with other people who did similar things. And then now you have to deal with all that. And so it's like you've dug a deeper hole, and you've dug a deeper hole, and each time it's like it gets exponentially harder to get out. So, you know, until you get to that point where you're ready to see it. And I think it's important, you know, to have patience with yourself and with people who aren't there yet. You know, all you can do is tell them the truth as you see it, and love them and support them, and know that if they go back, that's their choice. Like there's still something left unresolved. They're still trying to understand something. Otherwise they would be done. You know, and until we get to that point where we have that understanding, the understanding the realization of reality, the self-awareness, that's the breakthrough from the denial. And that's what gets you out, and that's what sets you free. And then there's a whole lot more healing work to do after that, but that's how you break that chain. That's how you break that cycle. So I just wanted to put that out there for those of you who, are really stuck there, and you're just looking for answers and reasons and whys and all of this. And I hope that that's beneficial for you. If you have any questions about that, feel free to type them in the comments below, or send me an email through my website, or find me on Facebook. And if there's anything I can help you with, do let me know. And thank you for tuning in. See you soon.